Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Manitoba Agriculture and Resource Development CropTalk webinar. If you have any questions during this presentation today, please type them into the questions section of the GoToWebinar menu, and we will answer them at the end of the presentation. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording. Thank you.
Thanks, Lori. I'd like to welcome everybody to the September 23rd edition of CropTalk. And today we're going to start off with a little bit of an update as to how harvest has been progressing throughout the province. And then we'll go into a little bit of a talk on fall weed control. There's more and more crop being taken off right now, and we're starting to see with some of the recent rains, we're starting to see some good growth on some of those fields. So producers are starting to do some spraying, so I thought it'd be a good time maybe just do a little bit of an update on fall weed control, and then from that we'll jump into the crop scouting panel, and they'll be there to answer some of the questions that have come in over the past week. So with that, a little bit of a crop update. Looking at where we are, it's amazing what a week of nice weather can do and how much harvest can be done. And when you look at the numbers here, winter wheat and fall rye have been taken off for a while. But one of the things about the winter wheat and fall rye is the fall seeded stuff is starting to come up. I've seen a couple fields where end of a couple of days now we'll be able to see rows in those fields. So definitely the conditions are good for that crop to germinate and come through the ground. Cereal crops, we're definitely getting close to most of those being done. We're in the mid 90s percent done in most of those. So those crops are coming off, and basically the only things that I'm seeing out there that where there was a couple of late seeded crops, whether they be reseeded because there might have been some issues with, say, canola in the spring or something like that, but those are not many crops, not many cereal crops left out there now. Canola is probably our biggest crop that's still out there, but even that has jumped quite a bit from last week. We're 78% done, and it's seems like every day it's just more and more acres are being taken off. It's one of the things I was talking to a producer a couple of days ago, and we were trying to figure out why some of a couple of his early sowing fields didn't yield as good as some of the later stuff that's coming off now. And we got just looking through the year, and one of the things that kind of came up was we had a couple of rainfall events in spring just as some of that canola was coming up, and then probably about a couple of weeks after, and by rainfall events, I'm talking 3 to 4 inches of hard rain, and we're wondering if that might have been the culprit that caused some of these earlier seeded canola fields not to do quite as well as we were expecting. Flax, it's barely any has been taken off that I'm aware of right now. A lot of it is brown, a lot of it is being sprayed, but still very little coming off. Even with the soybeans, especially in the western side of the province here, I think a lot of producers are concentrating more on the canola and getting it off, and the beans are still out there. Sunflowers, grain corn, silage corn, all of that still remains pretty much at 0% done. There might be the odd field of silage corn starting to come off, but I think the rest of it is still a little bit on the green side. When you look at our overall harvest, we're sitting at 70%. So from being behind for the last 2 or 3 weeks, we are now a little bit higher than our 3-year average at this time. And with the couple of days we've had over the last week here, I think last couple of days, I should say, we're probably even going to jump a little bit higher. Thought I'd put this one, and last week I put up as what our soil conditions were like and moisture wise, and I thought I'd put this up to just show what our percent of normal precipitation has been since May through September 20th. And you can see there's definitely been some areas where we've been over 100% or more. But in general, we're probably sitting, anywhere between that 75 and 80% of normal in most areas. There is a band that is less than 70%, but overall throughout the province, we're probably in that, that as an average, that's 70 to 80%. One thing I wanted to put up too is I've seen this map on Twitter, and it's talking about temperature for probability for the next, well, basically till the 27th of September. And you look at where Manitoba is, we're looking at 80 to 90% of a probability of above normal temperatures, which is going to be good for guys that are wanting to get some field work done, as well as clean up the rest of the harvest here. So with that, I'm going to go into a little bit about some keys for fall weed control. There was a question that came up regarding the flax. And yeah, the flax right now, some producers are desiccating, so either hitting it with Raglone or one of those type products to bring it in for harvest. So to get into some the keys to fall weed control, I think one of the things we need to look at first is scouting the fields. I guess we always talk about scouting before you do too many major things, and I think it's no different when you're looking at your fall weed control. Get out there, see what's happening. We're getting different weather events going through. We've had some frost, we've had some rainfall. We're getting a lot of growth happening out there. So go out there, see what you have for weeds, whether they be annuals, perennials, or winter annuals. And I think your management strategy for handling each of those weed problems is probably going to be a little bit different in the fall as it would be in the spring. In the springtime, we're trying to get rid of as many as possible. But right now, depending on what they are, I think is where we should be looking at for our management. So when you look at our annual weeds, and a lot of the annual weeds that we're probably seeing right now in the field, or the majority of them, is going to be a lot of the volunteer crop that is coming from seeds that have gone through the combine and are on the soil surface and starting to germinate. And most of these plants are plants that are germinating, or seeds that are germinating, are not going to have the ability to produce any seed this year. And we're probably going to have a killing frost in the next few weeks here that'll definitely take care of them. So if your big concern is you've got some wheat growing or canola growing in your field, probably not a big issue right now. One thing regarding canola, volunteer canola is starting to become a little bit more of a problem, and I think what we need to look at doing with it is trying to get it to germinate in the fall here, instead of sitting in the soil or on the top of the soil and germinating in the spring and getting going. It tends to be a little bit of a weed problem when we get it in the crop next spring, and especially those producers that are growing soybeans on canola. We're seeing a lot of issues with volunteer canola coming up in those crops. So one of the things you can go out and do with your annuals is a tillage, whether it be a heavy arrow or a sulfur type operation, and that'll clean up those plants fairly easily. Another thing, if you're looking at doing some chemical rotation, or if you have some issues with resistance in your field, and looking at applying some kind of fall applied herbicide, there's another possibility for you to go out and excuse me, and work these fields and get your fall herbicide on as well, getting ready for next year. So the perennial weeds, fall is a good time to manage perennial weeds. Once the temperatures start to get lower, the plants trigger carbohydrate movement down to the roots. So basically what they're doing is storing nutrients for themselves for the winter. moving sugar down into the root system. So it's an opportunity for you to go out there now with a product systemic product to go out there, and that'll follow the movement in through the plant down into the roots, and you get a pretty good kill on some of these plants. Now the big thing for this type of control, a lot of these weeds you get a lot better kill when you do it as a pre-harvest. But if we're looking post-harvest, timing and staging is something that you need to be looking at before you go to spray it, to see if you're going to make sure you get a better kill. And I just listed a few of the weeds that are kind of problem weeds that we usually like to deal with or try to get control of before spring. And Canada Thistle is one. And so if you're going out there, try to make sure your Canada Thistle has 3 to 4 new leaves. Even if you see the plants that are look kind of funny, because if you were straight cutting and or swathing, and the plant has had that'll look like it has a 6-inch stem, but then it's throwing out new leaves, those leaves would still take up chemicals. So look at 3 to 4 new leaves on Canada Thistle. For Dandelion, about 6 inches in diameter, this would be a good time to give it a shot. Dandelions are definitely a problem when we get going in the spring, so for sure take a look at them. Foxtail barley, probably one of the ones that a lot of producers are dealing with and have lots of questions about over the last 2 to 3 years here. So right now, go to those areas, those saline areas, and see if the foxtail barley is starting to show some new growth. And if you're seeing some new growth in that foxtail barley, an application of a herbicide is going to be, I like to call it step 1 of your control package with foxtail barley, because you'll need to do the same thing again in the spring. Quackgrass, 6 to 8 inches of growth, and usually what I like to do is if you go into the field and you're seeing some the quackgrass growth, if it's the length of your hand from your fingertips to your wrist, you definitely have probably enough to go out there and start looking at controlling it as well. So just a few of the harder to kill perennial weeds that would be a good time to look at getting some control now. When you look at our winter annuals, usually this time of year is a really good time to get a jump on these guys. They're small at this time of year, and when you got a smaller weed, it's easier to kill. So definitely take a look at your winter annuals. A lot of the winter annuals are starting to become problems because if we don't do any kind of control in the fall, they get going early in the spring, and by the time it comes to in-crop control the following year, they're either too big to kill, or in a lot of cases it may be even a lot more expensive to kill as well. So September, October, best time to control, but you need to assess the fields before spraying. One of the things that we're running into now is we're seeing a lot of frost starting to happen, and if you're going to spray winter annuals, you need to have about 60% green leaf tissue. So we've had a few frosts already, so if you get out there and you see some plants that maybe don't look quite as healthy, but you're still seeing a good 60% green leaf tissue, you still can do some control on these winter annuals. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see how they fare against the frost. So night flowering catchfly is probably the weakest of them for frost, then cleavers. And then as you move across, shepherd's purse, stinkweed, and then narrow-leaved hawksbeard is probably one of the best for cold tolerance. So looking at this chart, if you have any of them on the right-hand side that are issues, you definitely can. We're going to need some good frost before they're going to be in a situation where you're not going to be able to get some control at least. So definitely get out and be checking for these weeds as well, especially when you're depending on the crop you're going to be planting the following year. If you're planting a crop that some products that would be better to kill these weeds you can't use on that crop, make sure you're even just selecting the right fields for your crop rotation the following year, depending on the weeds that are out there. So talked a little bit about it, but I think we need to talk about frost. Frost is something that's going to be happening on a regular basis over the next couple of weeks till things end up for the season. So just a couple pointers on frost. If there's a light frost, usually light frost, we're talking 0 to -3, and not for a very long period of time, 2 to 3 hours. It will slightly affect perennials and winter annual weed control, but usually, after the frost, get out there, take a look around, see what the plants are doing. A light frost, you could probably spray the same day, the following day, I should say, and as long as the temperatures reach about 10 degrees for a couple hours during the afternoon, and if you can, try not to be spraying on a day that they're calling for a frost again that night, because it really limits the amount of time the product can be moved through the plant. If you can, giving the plants an extra 24 hours after light frost will be, good, because they just get the opportunity to start regrowing again. But again, a lot of times with the light frost, they very seldom shut down at all. If we get a harder frost, and when we're talking harder frost, we're looking at -4 degrees or colder, and usually for a longer period of time, recommendations are to wait for 2 to 3 days before you assess the damage in the field and see what kind of damage has been done to the weeds. If a lot of times, and I mentioned it a little bit earlier, that if you've got over 50 to 60% green material and you're still seeing active growth, after that third day or second or third day, you still could get out there if the temperatures change and we get those 10 degrees for a couple hours, you could get out and spray. Some producers have told me that sometimes when we get this frost and then gets the plant growing again, they get even better kills. So it's just because we get a killing frost doesn't mean that we're done spraying for the fall. Keep going back out to those fields and monitoring those fields and seeing what kind of growth you're getting back. So a little bit of a summary of fall weed control. It can be touchy, and if spraying when weeds are not actively growing, you're going to run into problems with the product not absorbing into the plant or moving throughout the plant, so you're not going to get the control you were hoping for. Time of day is important. Spraying in the morning or spraying in the evening is probably not an advisable thing to do. Wait till mid-afternoon, and by supper time should be starting to shut down. So you're going to have 4 or 5 hours a day when the temperature is going to be in that 10 degrees Celsius or better, and where you get potential for some plant growth. So that'd be your time for spraying. Well, one of the things also is that when we get these light frosts, you'll see that some of the plants tend to harden off, and then it's again to your advantage, because once they've hardened off, their ability to handle the colder temperatures increases, and your time for spraying has been extended, because those plants will continue to grow. So how hard a frost and the regrowth conditions after frost dictate your spraying window. And again, so if you got a light frost, spraying the next day is definitely possible. But harder frosts, you're looking at a couple days. The other thing to watch is the longevity of the frost. So if we're gonna get a frost from 11 o'clock at night till 7 o'clock in the morning, it's probably going to do more damage than a frost that's only going to occur for a couple hours. And I guess the last thing, and I'd like to mention about our fall weed control is rates may need to be adjusted as well. You know, if you're looking at harder to kill weeds, you're looking at weeds that are maybe hardened off because of the frost, may take a little extra. So, you know, a half liter is probably something you might not be using. The other thing is you may be adding surfactants so the product stays on the plant for a longer period of time and has the better ability to get into the plant. So products like ammonium sulfate could be something that you would could look at doing. And again, just making it easier for the product to get into the plant and work through the system. So I guess with that, one more thing I'd like to mention is I've been getting quite a few well, not calls, but I've been talking to producers and about roundleaf mallow seems to be pretty common in a lot of areas right now. An application of a glyphosate product should get good control of it right now. It's more of a getting a start for spring, and if you can get a control of it now, you'll control those spots. But yeah, it's not a too major of a weed to worry about. It's more patchy throughout the field, but a shot now this fall will definitely help in getting your control or getting ahead of it for next spring. So I guess with that, that was my my talk on the weed control or fall weed control and a little bit of an update. So we got, I don't see there if there's any questions. So I'm going to jump right into our crop scouting panel right now. And there's the group of people that are answering your questions. And Lori Forbes and my email address are on the bottom. So if you have questions, please feel free to contact us with your questions. We've been happy with the amount of questions that have been coming through so far, and we've got a good set of questions today. So I'm just going to jump right into them. I was out in a field the other day with a producer looking at his winter wheat, and it was showing some purpling of the leaves. And so Anne, I'm going to address this question to you. What would be causing something like that?
I know, maybe I can try to answer.
Okay, sure, David, if you're there, yeah, perfect.
All right. Purplish color on any green plants at this time of year.
Environmental stress at this time of year, so some of the lower temperatures might have been. I think that something like that.
Okay, we got both the answering right now.
Environmental.
Do you want to tell Anne that she's cutting in and out?
Anne, if I could just get you to hold on, I'm going to get Dave to answer the question. You're kind of cutting in and out right now. So Dave, if you could go ahead.
All right, thanks, Milo. I'll try. There can be a number of causes of purpling on leaves, on winter wheat, or any crop this time of year. Purpling is simply evidence of anthocyanin pigments. And anthocyanin pigments, which are responsible for that purple red color, are secondary pigment to the green color of chlorophyll. So as chlorophyll disappears, those anthocyanin pigments are unmasked. That is, they become evident. Now, it can be from any kind of stress, and that could be just simply cold temperatures. It could be in the early spring, it could be something like phosphorus deficiency. And what else? John Hurd, you're on the call, so maybe you want to chime in on this as well.
I appreciate your explanation, David. That's right on about the anthocyanin. And I just look at that as being a trigger of that there's some type of stress. Sum them up, cold temperatures, it could be lack of phosphorus, it could be herbicide injury and stress also, but that purpling is that anthocyanin pigments.
So this time of year, we have to imagine that it is cold temperatures, or would we suspect nutrient deficiency even at this stage?
Well, my word on phosphorus on winter wheat or rye is that forgetting to put phosphorus on winter wheat is a mistake that a farmer only makes once in their farming career, because the penalty is severe. So if this happens, Lino, if you're seeing much of this, it's a once in a lifetime mistake, because that farmer will never make that boo-boo again.
Yeah, the phosphate is there. We also had probably 2 days before this, maybe a little bit more, we had some really severe winds, and we also had cold temperatures. So I agree with you regarding the environment. I think it's more stress from the environment than anything. Okay, thanks, guys.
Can we get Anne back on the line for anything we missed? Or
We were having problems with her cutting in and out, so Lori is working with her right now. So
okay, thanks.
Thanks, guys. Next question for John Hurd. How important is it to soil sample from 0 to 6 and 6 to 24? And then I got another question for you right after that.
Okay, Lionel, we're going to try to go to some slides that I have set up.
Okay, so Lori, could you give John the screen?
Are we getting that?
Yes, we should be able to show your screen now, I think.
Okay.
Yep, you got her.
Okay, so we're going to talk about both fall fertilizer timing and about the depth there. But the first kind of rule of the day on fall temperature, think back to the old election saying it's about the soil temperature, stupid, and it's about keeping nitrogen in the ammonium form. And we just have to keep that top of mind. That's the strategy with fall fertilization. Now, back to your first question, Lionel, why do we sample to 2 feet of depth? Well, because it is best related to the performance of the following crop. And here's some may call it ancient, I call it cornerstone research done by Soper in the 70s. And we don't expect this to have changed, but the correlation between nitrate N and the 2-foot depth is what is best correlated with the yields. If we are sampling less than that, those depths can be suitable for immobile nutrients like phosphate and phosphorus and potash, but not really for nitrogen. And the good news, I guess, for people is that sampling to 4 feet to 48 inches really wasn't any better than just sampling to 2 feet. So there's your pass. We're not going to ask you to sample to 4. 2 is good enough, and we've got a great force of crop consultants and dealers in Manitoba that can do the 2-foot sampling now. So I don't see this question much anymore, but if you want to use a conversion, here are conversions that Regis Karamanis has done based from Saskatchewan work. And so you can guesstimate based on your 0 to 6 inch or your 0 to 12 inch, you can guesstimate how much is in the full 2-foot sample. But I've done this. This next slide, we took about 50 soil samples from Toulon where they done that, and we did the estimate. And so the bottom line there is the blue is what was in the top 6 inches, and the red is what was in the 6 to 24 inch depth, and that yellow line is an estimate. Sometimes the estimate works, but all those red lines that are above there, those are ones where the estimate was bad, not useful. And that's what you would sacrifice if you were to use a thumb rule to extrapolate, especially in dry years when we can have nitrogen in the bottom depth there that we're not detecting in the surface. So that's kind of my little speech about that. And frankly, if your soil sampler, if your consultant can only sample to 6 inches, get out the yellow pages and find someone that can do the job right, someone that can sample to 2 feet. There's no shortage of people that have good equipment that can do full depth sampling. Can I move right in the next question, Lionel?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, if you want to move into the next question, and when that's basically temperature and the application of N, right?
Sure. And I guess the next one here is why this is important to us. And people are getting pretty antsy to get fertilizer out right now. And it's because traditionally, well, for wheat, 44% of our nitrogen goes down in the fall. And last year, that just did not happen because we got shut out. The rain had actually started by about September 20th, and that's what essentially shut down fall operations and fertilization. So a big chunk of Manitoba depends on this fall fertilization. And the way that most of it goes down, I have on the right side of the screen. Traditionally, only a small portion goes on as broadcast nitrogen. The majority is banded, such as a banded ammonia or co-banded ammonia plus phosphate is an excellent way to build phosphorus levels. So the majority is banded. This year, broadcasting was very important to us to make up for the lack of fall fertilization, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's our plan A, but it's a very good plan B when we need it. So let's look at that fall fertilization that goes on there, and some another classic bit of research done by Kevin Thiessen, Don Flayton and company almost 20 years ago, looking at what about the timing of that fall banded fertilizer. In this case, looking at urea, and they found the red line there is that if it stays dry, if you're on well-drained soils, and if it stays dry, we can apply fertilizer, banded fertilizer early, like before now in September, and the performance is actually really good compared to spring banded. You may look at that and say that yields higher than spring banded, and unfortunately some people found out that this year sometimes spring banded buggers up our seed bed, makes it cloddy, and can actually impair yield. So sometimes fall banded can look very good compared to spring banded. So in dry conditions, if we stay dry as a bone, like maybe we are right now, from now till seeding, we'd expect that early applied nitrogen can perform well. The reality may well be that blue line though, that's in poorer drained areas. And when we get some moisture or get wet conditions in the fall or spring. And in that case, applying fertilizer now in September, we could be looking at 80% of grain yield compared to if we waited until late October when soils have cooled. So this is the penalty. This is the consequence we're looking at with early fall application, and it's because of the temperatures. And the temperatures, Lionel, I've just lifted this morning from our Manitoba Ag homepage. What's relevant to you in the Southwest is showing soil temperatures. I think this is just to the 2-inch depth, and showing that we were maybe tracking down, but now with these warm temperatures, daily temperatures, if you're looking at an average, it's about 15 degrees C. These temperatures here are ones from 8 o'clock this morning. So even morning temperatures are still in that 12 to 13 degrees. So soils really are not cool. The target that we would be looking for would be 10 minimum, 5 optimum, as far as putting down fertilizer and keeping it in the ammonium form. And this is, if you want to know what's the consequence, this is data that I adopted from that Thistle study, showing that if the average temperature at the band depth, like right now, if it's 15 degrees C, the average, that in 13 days, half of that urea would convert to nitrate. And again, nitrate is the form that we can lose to leaching if we're on coarse sandy soils and get wet, or to denitrification if we're on waterlogged clay soils. So, but as temperature drops or declines to 10 degrees C, then it takes longer for that microbial conversion to take place. When we're down to 5 degrees, then it takes, again, not much longer. And now again, our temperature's not going to stay at 15. They're going to track down, but as it's taking time to track down to 10 and 5 degrees, we're seeing conversion of N to that nitrate form. And something I need to remind you, this is banded urea. If it's broadcast urea, it's quite a bit faster than this. Broadcasting urea is just one of our least efficient ways of providing yield in next year's crop. So what can people do? This is a slide from Fabian Fernandez. He spoke at our MAC in 2016 and shows that, for example, with anhydrous ammonia and then treating anhydrous ammonia with N-Serve can, in the 3 weeks after application, pretty well reduces in half the amount of nitrogen that converts to nitrate. Now, that's what we expect it to do. And as we move into that cold period, then the cold temperatures slow that further conversion. If you look at urea, and they treated up urea with N-Serve, or the active ingredient we'd consider Entrench, again, it reduces about in half the amount that has converted to nitrate in that kind of critical 3 weeks after application. That's the column on the right, the 6 weeks. We wouldn't be seeing that in the fall. You'd want that to happen in the spring when we actually do want stuff to convert to nitrate, but not in that fall period. So my summary is this, that if you're applying fall nitrogen, and if the soils are warm, and if growers are antsy and saying, I don't want to be shut out like I was in 2019, I got to get the nitrogen on. Well, if your soils are warm, this is why we have nitrification inhibitors. That's why we have a suite of products. There's N-Serve, a new one from Koch Fertilizers, Centuro, Entrench for treatment of urea, and Super U is treated with DCD, another nitrification inhibitor. And there are some other products on the marketplace also. Just make sure that they're working with a known active ingredient like nitropyrin or DCD, and the application rates are similar to on these other products. The other option is just the controlled release nitrogen ESN, which has that polymer coating and will tend to keep it from releasing to the soil. And of course, banding the nitrogen is very important. Or the other thing is just wait till Mother Nature does the work for you. Wait till the soils have cooled. Wait till they're down between 10 to 5 degrees C, and Mother Nature will do this. Will have slowed that bacterial activity to such an extent that the nitrogen is kept in the ammonium form, doesn't convert till nitrate until we're into next spring. That's my sermon, Lionel. I don't know if you have any questions, but that's what they need to know.
Actually, really good information, John, and yeah, thanks for bringing that forward. I think it's really timely right now with it being warmer than maybe we were expecting. So
yeah, I'll get this written up in current crop topics and out hopefully by the end of the day.
great. Thanks, John. Next question, and I think I had Marla or John, I guess pegged for this one as well. Foxtail growing in saline areas. They say the best way to control foxtail in cases is to bury the seed, because if you bury the seed, it has real problems of germinating. So he's thinking of tillage, but then he's thinking, does this make the saline area worse? So Marla, would you like to tackle that one?
Sure. Yeah, so tilling's a bad thing in saline areas because that salinity is coming up to the soil surface through evaporation or the capillary rise or a rise of water up to the soil surface, and then the evaporation from the soil surface. So every time water evaporates from the surface, the salts are drawn up and then they end up left behind, which is why you end up getting sometimes that white crust under very saline situations. So in this kind of case, depending on how bad it is, you can definitely make it worse because again, with every tillage pass, you cause more of that evaporation to happen. So the worst thing that you can do really in a saline area is to till it. That being said, what you're trying to accomplish in this case is to basically kill or get rid of that foxtail barley. And in that case, foxtail barley can be killed relatively easily through tillage because it has a shallow rooting system. And I'm not a weeds expert, but that's one thing that I know about it. The big thing though in this case is to just till that under, to bury the seeds, to kill that foxtail barley, disrupting that root system is not enough, because if you just leave that patch there, then you end up having further issues with just making the salinity worse, and that foxtail barley will continue to come back. So even if you try to turn it over really well, bury the seeds deep, again, it's not going to get rid of the problem. One thing I want to mention, I retweeted something this morning that Lyle Cowell from Saskatchewan had tweeted, and he posted a photo of a very saline area that was basically white with salinity, is so strong. And where what they had done was they planted saline master blend, which has AC saltlander in it, which is a green wheatgrass that is highly tolerant to salinity. But one of the things that he mentioned in his tweet is you need to be patient. And a lot of people who have tried growing AC saltlander or using those extremely saline tolerant blends is that it does take a long time sometimes for them to get established. But once they are established, they have very good growth, even in that saline area. So if you're looking to get rid of the foxtail barley, to simply just plant it again to an annual in that region next year is not the best approach. You want to take that patch and you actually want to seed it down to something that is more tolerant than the annual crops that we would typically grow, that will then outcompete future growth of that foxtail barley.
Okay, thanks, Marla. So with that AC saltlander, then you would till that and get it ready and just seed it next year, or seed right into it, or?
Yeah, and you'd have to follow up with a forage specialist to figure out exactly how to get that AC saltlander or that saline master blend properly established. Again, establishment can be tricky, but as Lyle said, like it's an exercise in patience in this case, because it doesn't look good from what I understand for the first few years. It looks quite weak, but eventually it will actually get going. It's going to be, I think, quite I think that we just haven't seen a lot of people adopt these things yet. And looking at, separating out these saline areas. One of the reasons why, like, it's in the way, right, to have to always drive around it. But the reality is you're practically driving around it right now because it's just a bunch of foxtail barley that you don't want either run through the combine or going into a baler or whatever it is that you're doing through that field. And so you do want to target that area, manage it differently than the rest of the field. And by doing so, you can actually maintain a smaller area of salinity rather than allowing it to kind of continually creep out into the field. Because again, you actually want to dewater the soil to allow that water to drain down. And you're dewatering the soil in this case with a more aggressively growing crop, something that you're putting there in place of the foxtail barley.
You're right, and I have a producer that around his alfalfa field, he planted some of that saltlander, and it does take a long time. I think it's over this would have been the second year, and you almost need to look to find it, but it is there. So
yeah, and the photo that Lyle had posted on Twitter, I think was third year. And so it was finally, like, they have the picture, they baled it, it looks pretty good. And the other thing to note for those who are feeding it, because it's a green wheatgrass, it has good feed quality compared to a lot of saline tolerant forages that cattle just don't want to eat. So it's got better, I shouldn't say feed quality, but better palatability. So it is something that is quite useful, developed out of Swift Current in the Salt Lab. And so it's a very, potentially very good forage, again, for these extreme saline areas that are still going to be able to maintain some palatability and useful for feeding.
okay, great, thanks, Marla. Next question for Dane Fraze. What causes the red colored seed in canola sample? I've had 2 or 3 producers ask me the question. One was wondering if it was something to do with the seeding and the stress the crop was under, but I just wanted to see what do you think caused that?
Generally, red seed in the canola sample is due to the variety. It depends on the variety that the grower is growing and if they've changed from previous years. For example, Roundup Ready canolas typically have a more reddish seed coat than a Liberty tolerant canola. You typically get a blacker seed coat there. So that is a big part of it is variety. The second part could be the time of swathing or desiccation or whenever that crop is cut. So that crop was swathed a little on the green side a little bit early. That seed doesn't have as much time to accumulate pigments in the seed coat, and as a result, it can be a lighter color red. Really, the external seed coat color is not a grade determinant factor. You'll only be looking at the internal color of canola seed, whether it's green, chlorophyll damage, that sort of thing, rather than the outside. So yeah, it looks eye-catching, but nothing to be concerned about unless there's green inside the seed.
Okay, thanks. But then the next question is for you too. When you mentioned green seed, getting readings of 3 to 5% green seed in my canola, is there anything I can do to reduce this percentage?
Yeah, not a lot that can be done. Without having much context on this particular field, was the field swathed? Is it still standing? Is it?
This field is swathed.
This field is swathed. Unfortunately, no. At this point, there is not much that can be done. If the field has been in swath for 7 to 10 days, it has had the prerequisite time to try and reduce that chlorophyll content in the seed. With swath a little bit on the green side, or after some frost damage, frost can lock in chlorophyll into the seed. There is very little that can be done practically to reduce green seed content in the canola sample later on, especially if it's been in swath for a while. The farmer might harvest that field, take samples regularly and do a crush out to see if certain parts of the field are less green than others. Consider binning it separately, and certainly put it on aeration, because that green seed content can cause that canola to spoil more quickly than regular, healthy, or stable canola. So that canola does need to be binned carefully, put on air, and probably rotated once throughout the winter, unless it's going to be moved early to a grain elevator or crush facility.
Okay, so he was asking if a rainfall on it would reduce the green. So you're saying that after 10 days or whatever, it's what it is going to be is what it's going to be.
That's right. If it rained within 1 to 4 days after swathing, that might have been beneficial, and it might have helped turn that color a little bit more. But as you disconnect that plant from its stem at the base, once it's swathed, that translocation of chlorophyll really is affected, because it requires the veins, the xylem tissue to be connected and removing, and the phloem tissue to be removing chlorophyll from the seed. Once that connection is severed, that physiological process stops. So rain does help a little bit after swath, but 10 days after is going to be very unlikely to affect anything.
Okay, thank you. Question for John Gavlowski. Producer had cutworm problems this spring and he had to reseed the field. Should he be concerned next spring, and should he be looking at different crops to grow?
Yeah, so cutworms do go in cycles where we get a few years of higher populations, and then the populations will drop down, and often it's a combination of natural enemies and sometimes weather factors that drive those cycles. So coming off of a year where we did have a lot of cutworm issues, people should be at least scouting for and anticipating possibly some cutworm issues next year. Now, that being said, the tricky part is the fields where we see the higher levels aren't always consistent from year to year. The female moths, when they're laying their eggs, mainly in August, early September, they're also nectar feeders, so they will sometimes be drawn to fields or areas of fields that have some late crops, possibly some flowering crop or even weed patches. So things don't tend to stay in the same areas and fields where they were the previous year. The patches do move around. So that's the tricky part. It's hard to know for sure that which fields will be the ones with the higher levels the next year. I realize that does make it tricky when you're trying to seed something like your canola or soybeans, and you're trying to decide, do we go with a seed treatment that should give us some cutworm control or not? You're paying extra money for it. But if you have been burned by cutworms for the past couple of years, they seem to be very high in your localized area, it might be something to consider. But again, hard to predict where those patches will be.
Okay, thanks, John. Dane, timing for spray or desiccating sunflowers?
Oh, great question. That is about this week, roughly, for sunflower growers, I guess, depending on your seeding date and your environmental conditions to date, heat unit accumulation and such like that. The safe desiccation stage for sunflowers, both oilseed and confectionery types, is considered R9, where the back of the head, as in your picture there, is a banana yellow, and the bracts, the little petals on the edge of the backside of the head, that's the bract, is turning brown, like you can see there. So that is considered R9, or physiological maturity. That crop is then relatively safe from frost, or it is safe from frost, but desiccation or a very hard killing frost is necessary to begin drying that plant down. Now, some sunflower processors use a slightly different method of calculating when to desiccate. So do check with your sunflower buyer, because they might have a slightly different set of rules they like to follow. For instance, Schooler in Winkler uses a combination of the R9 and the moisture percentage determination. So what they would do is go out into the field and clip the heads of a small sunflower head, a medium-sized head, and a very large head, given that the larger heads tend to ripen more slowly. There's just more material there. Clip those heads off, rub all the seeds off, and aggregate that sample. Then take a 75-gram sample, not a 150, but a 75-gram sample. Run it through your moisture meter, usually the 919 moisture meter. Get your readings off the charts, and then double that number. So say if that reading is 11% on a 75-gram sample, double that, that puts you at 22%. Schooler has indicated that they prefer desiccation under 20% seed moisture content. So 22 would still put you a little bit over that seed moisture window, but less than 20 is when they prefer to desiccate. So that tends to be a little bit later than R9 or as that crop is starting to dry down naturally. So it's a combination of the two, depending on what your buyer prefers.
Okay, great. That's good to know, especially about checking with the buyer. So. Okay, well, that does it for the questions. Thanks again, panel, for giving some really good answers. So a few quick slides here before we end today. I wanted to mention about the hay listing service again and crop residue burning. Definitely be checking those websites. And if you've got feed for sale, definitely go to the Manitoba Hay Listing Service, or if you're looking for feed, put it on there. There is areas that are still looking for feed. The farm production extension specialists in the province, there's their contact information. And join us next week. That'll be September the 30th for the next edition of Crop Talk. Thanks everybody for attending.